When Namita asked me to be in conversation with her, I didn't know where to start. Really, how do you talk to someone who's written 25 books in 40 years? Where do you start? So it's wonderful to be in conversation with a writer and a very dear friend. So I thought I'd start right at the beginning. I was reading up things about Namita and said, where do I start? And yesterday I listened to a podcast about, Namita having a conversation in England with Monocle Radio. And it took me back to her very first book, Paro. And I thought maybe it would be good to start with Paro, which today, this year, celebrates 40 years. It's now a Penguin classic. So I'm going to, spin off that, and I've persuaded Namita to read from Paro as well. So, Namita, you wrote this book all that time ago, and I read some of the reviews, and I think you walked a very untrodden path. So, tell us a little bit of how you started.
Well, first of all, I want to say, can you hear me? Give me yours. Hello, yeah, that's better. It is such a delight to be here in the heart of the literary community. Yeah, at the Jaipur Lit Fest, I'm there ahead of time working on the programming afterwards, but at the festival itself, I'm hardly in a sane frame of mind. I wander around like a mad cow, which is grazing in corners. So here to meet so many friends and to have all of you listening in to me is just wonderful. Paro, to your question, Paro was written when I was 26 and I had been thrown out of college. I had been evicted. And I just said, one day the first line came to me and then I wrote it. And then magically I found an agent, I found a publisher. It came out by the time before I was 28. And it did really, really well. But no good thing happens just by itself. In India, it did very well internationally in terms of reviews and I hope sales. But in India, people looked at me as though I was evil incarnate because they couldn't understand how a middle-class married young woman could write a book that was so subversive. But actually, it wasn't the mild sexuality in it which was the subversive thing. What I found was nobody could stomach the idea of my laughing at men because there were 2 or 3 characters. And I quite liked them, but I thought they were very funny in their masculinity. Sometimes toxic, sometimes not. But the whole male act, I was just affectionately funny about it. And that humor, I think, because I can never understand how social comedy can survive for 40 years. But I think that's what made it last a bit.
And, when we were speaking earlier, so the story she told me, which I found absolutely so interesting, is how she found an agent. She just looked at the phone directory, called up a couple of numbers, got herself an agent. In 2 days, she had...
One day?
In 1 day, she had an editor or 2 editors on board.
It was beginner's luck.
Well...
Actually, but beginner's luck is followed by beginner's failure. So I had 10 years of grim failure, but that's another story.
But I also wanted to ask you, we were talking earlier about the reviews. It was a very bold book for its time, and it continues to resonate 40 years later. There's something there, obviously. So when we're talking about reviews, how did you deal with the reviews? You said you had a mixed bag of reviews when Paro came out. How did you deal with it when you were so young and you had no community to buffer you?
Well, I was dealing with a lot of things, so I just put it as one more. The effect it had in me was that I was studying English literature in college. I had topped in the first year, and before I had unfortunately been thrown out by the nun, Mother Aquinas. And it was a long, I was living on highs and lows, ups and downs every 6 months. And so I just put it into the back burner because there was so much else happening. And there was one review that healed me. It was a review by K.K. Daruwala. He was the only person who wrote a long and very kind review. Otherwise, the number of prominent writers I look up to and revere, and if I try to remember the things they said, Uh, it happens. I mean, it's okay.
True.
Anything that's a little different from what you're, especially literature, people have a very exalted idea every decade or so about what is the literary voice. And this wasn't the literary voice of that time. That was what I think.
So we decided to talk about Never Never Land because Namita, every conversation I've had with her has talked about her deep love for the mountains. So this is the book we both chose to talk about. But before that, Namita, I would love you to read a passage from Paro.
Okay.
Or two.
One. So Paro is about this character. She's not a vamp at all. She's just, she's not even a very sexual woman. She just is the ultimate manipulative charmer. And charm, can take, it's just inexplicable what is charm. But she had it, or charisma, or whatever. And this is viewed through the eyes of the very slightly dull Paro, Priya, who both likes her and dislikes her, and it's in her voice. So this is Priya telling about Paro. So it begins, "Oh no," she replied, "it's part of being a beautiful woman. It's a full-time occupation and much harder work than it seems. But, nodding sagely, it has its rewards, I confess. I wished I was the sort of woman who could say things like that." But she was a faddist at heart. I remembered her silly, short-lived enthusiasms, which all of us were supposed to fall in with. First, there were the yoga classes, which she made Lennon join along with her. She would insist that he wake up early in the mornings and drive her down to the India Gate lawns, where, according to Lennon, they had to undergo all kinds of gruesome physical contortions in public, as our Prime Minister still does. Her enthusiasm was almost a primitive exhibitionism, actually. She would show off her skills to all and sundry, quite unmindful of the suitability of the occasion. There was this chic cocktail party which an industrialist friend of Lennon's was hosting in his farm. Even Paro was quite excited about it. She dressed to the hilt in a dull green and gold South Indian silk sari which reflected the color of her eyes somehow. She wore a lot of old-fashioned jewelry as well and flowers in her hair. It took us hours and hours to drive to the farm, for the roads were really bumpy and we lost our way once. But Paro was full of beans as ever when we arrived and determined to dazzle them all, whatever the means, and dazzle them she did. Once she had downed a few whiskies, she looked as though a bulb had been lit inside her, and a sort of electric energy field seemed to surround her. Lennon, Suresh, and I hovered around like shadows, or like moths, I thought poetically. There was a lot of moths around, actually, and all kinds of other insects, as the farm was near the Yamuna River. The atmosphere was quite tranquil, even a little subdued, in spite of all the pretty fairy lights and soft Chennai music. It was, I could see, going to be a very proper party. Suresh determinedly set about circulating. When we met half an hour later, Paro was deep in conversation with a very handsome man. Suresh told me very importantly and a shade too loudly that he was rich and famous industrialist who owned textile mills and oil mills. This gives the time away because today no rich and famous industrialist has textile mills or oil mills. They have other sort of mills. This was written 40 years ago. Rich and handsome, I thought, wistfully. His wife or girlfriend or whoever it was that he was with was a very beautiful woman as well. She was wearing a stunning sheer net sari with a daring little blouse. I felt cold looking at her and pulled my pashmina shawl tightly around me. I could see that Paro was bent on conquest. Her lips were parted, her eyes narrowed, and the speculative look I knew so well was rising in her eyes. The woman in the net sari began wilting. Her smile froze as she observed Paro's untimid advances. It remained frozen for some time and was then transmuted into a tremulous, threatening snarl. I could not hear what Paro was saying, but the man seemed intrigued. He looked appeasingly at his date first and then seemed to forget her presence completely. Suddenly I found Paro throwing down her palla and wrapping it around her waist, lungi style, and before I could even figure out what was happening, she was in the grass, sandals kicked off, and two long, beautiful white legs pointing like cranes to the night sky. She stood like that on her head for over a minute in perfect, confident balance. The eyes of every single person at the party were riveted to those long alabaster legs. She looked so nude somehow. Her legs were white and perfectly shaped, and I could even glimpse her shadowed thighs and black lace panties. Lenin and Suresh rushed to her to form a sort of protective cordon. But she was on her feet again, flushed, triumphant, not at all embarrassed. We were just talking about yoga, she said nonchalantly, before they encircled her and led her sternly home. We left a trail of shocked, unbelieving looks and incredulous whispers behind us. So this was just Paro, and I want to share something with you and with all of you in the audience, because I'd been told not to talk about it, but now I've been told I can at least tell people, and that is that Paro is being made into a film by a the rights were bought some time ago, but you know, rights keep getting bought and assignments keep happening. But now the first script is complete. And it's so exciting to watch Paro being viewed from another perspective, because this is a very well-known and very talented scriptwriter. And trying to see how she looks at Paro, because it's very exciting for a writer to have somebody else looking from their perspective at what one is doing. So I'm just so delighted to see this happening. 3 years later, when the film comes out, I'll come with the script writer here and we'll all talk. Okay, go ahead.
So when Namita and I, like I said, started talking about this, and she said she wanted to talk about her deep love of the mountains. And so when I started reading this, the mountains make a very firm impression on the reader. But I think equally what I was completely fascinated by was how Namita describes friendships. You know, friendships between women, we take our friendships quite seriously. Female friendships, I know I really love my girlfriend gang, very important part of my everyday. And what Namita has written is about two women, one is in her 90s and one is over 100. And I'm going to read the blurb and then ask Namita the questions. I absolutely love the book. This is the one, Never Never Land. And it's a slim book, and I was telling Namita earlier, I have a tremendous fear of flying. And when I got on the plane, I did a 2.5-hour flight last week. I began to read the book, and I didn't look up till I landed. So that tells you something about, you know, how much it moved me. So thank you, Namita. Lonely, middle-aged, at a personal and professional dead end, Iti Arya flees the towers and bright lights of Gurgaon for the dacha, a remote cottage in the Kumaon Himalayas, where she had perhaps spent the happiest years of her childhood. Over the course of that single monsoon in the hills, in the company of two grandmothers, 90-something Badi Amma and Rosinka Paul Singh, aged 102, and a mysterious girl who may be her sister, Iti will make peace with her approximate life and quiet desolation. She will witness the vanity of youth, but also its vulnerability and tenderness, the indignities of age and also its courage and consolations. She will submit to life and an eternal spirit of the mountains. I think that it was amazing because, you know, there are two themes that I saw, and I'd like to ask you about the first, which is this deep and both forgiving and unforgiving friendship between the two ladies.
Well, I'm 69. I'll be 69 next month in January, and I've grown much, much closer to some women friends and forgotten about others. But I'm deeply interested in my last 3 novels on aging, because I've seen that as one grows older, one becomes almost invisible to the younger generation. It's not their fault. It's just it's how you're bracketed. And the young are often very kind to older people, but they're another country. So I wrote a novel called Jaipur Journals, which had I'll come back to the point, I'm leading there. Jaipur Journals had the character who I really love, a very vicious, frustrated writer who goes to literature festivals like this one. She has an unpublished novel in her handbag, and she writes malicious, anonymous letters to the authors. And she's all the things of old age which people forget are there, which is rage, anger, ego, assertion, betrayed hopes. These things happen as you grow older. Then the other one was called The Blind Matriarch, and that had a very kind, wise old woman in it. And then here in this novel, there were two women who were completely the opposite of each other. There was Rosinka, who was a bit of Paro maybe, in the sense she was an aging Paro. She was full of glamour and charm, and always had her own way. She was, you could say that the character from my first novel, Paro, came back at 100 years old and as charming and as likable and as dislikable as that earlier Paro. And the other one was of somebody called Amma, Badi Amma, who was a more pragmatic person. But it's just that when you grow older, you have to make peace with so many things. These two women had bitterly betrayed each other, bitterly hated each other. But here in their old age, they each had not much to fall back on. And the burden of those good and bad memories both bound them together. And that friendship, and that really is the thing of friendships in older ages, as you grow older, because they carry not just good memories, they carry anger, betrayal, bad points, so many things. But you have to overlook them because you move on. So it's really that element of friendship which happens as you know, I mean, when you're young, you can have a best friend and say, I never want to talk to you again, and delete them, block them on the phone, and maybe you move on. But when you've spent several years together, you're bound to have had ups and downs, and those make you know each other better. So that was that bit. Now ask me about the Himalayas if you want.
Yeah. Would you like to read a little bit or read both parts together? I know you have two
I'll
parts.
talk about the Himalayas and
Sure.
read a little bit.
So the second part of the book, it is set in the Kumaon Hills. It is about the mountains, and there is Iti who comes seeking sanctuary and doesn't really find it. But also, I was fascinated in this age of when we're all, looking at the world and what's happening to it. What Namita writes about the mountains, which sort of reclaims itself with flood and fury and landslides and fire. The minute you invade its space, it seems to come out and take itself back in a sense, and that's the second theme I saw, and it made me sort of anxious, I would say that.
I grew up in Nainital. I'm a Kumaoni, but I feel a bit of an imposter because I live most of my life now in Delhi, go back as occasionally as I can, but it is still occasional, to the hills. And that makes the writing even more precious to me, because even when I'm sitting in my room in Delhi, which I think is like a cave, my room in Delhi is somewhere between a cave, a shoe shelf, and a bookshelf. It's a very messy room. And I sit there and I feel I'm in the hills again, because if I can't be there physically, I can be there in imagination. But every time I do go to the hills, there's a shock, not of recognition, but of almost revulsion, because the hills I grew up in and which live on in my books and my mind and in my memories don't exist in many parts. They do exist largely in the places you can't go to. But it's not just climate change. It's especially after COVID that people started going to the hills all the time to search for something. So the reasons the tourists went were for the very best reasons, to search for peace and quiet and solitude and the purity of the mountains. Actually, the mountains are no more pure or anything than anyone else. They are full of the same scheming human race as anywhere else, but when there are less people, they are more in touch with nature. So it's a very... I'll read out a passage to show you. So, I mean, I have mixed feelings about the mountains. It's so. As I was telling Jayapriya, one of the worst things about me as a writer for lit fests and interviews is that I completely forget about a book the minute I finish writing it. So I don't remember much about my books. I don't remember much about the characters. But I have a feeling that what I found here was a bit to do with what you were asking me. It says, this is a girl who, as she explained, goes back to the hills from Gurugram, Gurgaon, works in a publishing company. She leaves her school WhatsApp group. She leads a rather circumscribed life to go to the mountains and to these two old women who seem to know something which she doesn't, some sort of wisdom. So she says, her name is Iti. She says, the weather has changed again. Rain and hail and sleet for days on end. A helicopter has crashed over Badrinath. Buses have disappeared into ravines and khads and rivers are in spate. The electricity comes and goes. The internet keeps us alerted and updated to the havoc around. They call it climate change and global warming and sterile words like that, but it means more than that. It is the wrath of the gods. That is what Badi Amba told me, and I believe her. Uttaranchal, Uttarakhand, is the Dev Bhumi, the land of the gods. That is what they called it in the Manaskhand, in the ancient epics. Now, the mountain gods are impatient beings. They like solitude. They don't enjoy being jostled around. So they've decided to push away the tourists and the greedy builders who are polluting our Dev Bhumi. They will push them over the cliffs. They will bury them under landslides. They will drown them in the overflowing rivers. If they don't understand, she added, they will set the forests on fire. They will reclaim our sacred land and make it green and young again. I had never seen her so passionate about anything before. She was not the only one, and so on. So that really is the feeling. And a parallel feeling was, this is supposed to be the land of the gods. But somebody told me when I was in the hills last, they said, you don't understand, the gods have left the mountains. The gods no longer want to live in the Himalaya, or at least in the lower Himalayas. They have gone in search of whatever was the sacred spots that they inhabited. And I really feel that too, because what is sacred? It's a vibe you get. You come to a lit fest like this, you get a vibe. You go to a riot, you get another vibe. You get a lot of anxious and disgruntled tourists, you get another vibe. So the gods may just be deserting and going up for higher pastures. I don't know. But I love the mountains, and the day they sort of renew themselves, I'll be so happy.
But you are doing lots of different books featuring the mountains. You have written several books featuring the mountains, haven't you?
Yeah, I've sort of lost count. I did a book called, what is it called? Mountain Echoes, Reminiscences of Mountain Women, Kumaoni Women. And I took 4 of my relatives and recorded their memories. And this was, in fact, invaluable for me for a novel I did later. And then I did the trilogy, the Himalayan trilogy, A Himalayan Love Story, The Book of Shadows, and The Book of Shadows and The Things to Leave Behind, that 3. Then I did a book on the Himalaya with Ruskin Bond. Then I did a book called East of Southeast, the Himalayan Arc. And I've done more. I mean, I just can't remember now. But altogether about 9 to 10 books, all set in the Himalayas, which is my effort to crawl back in my head to the place which is most important to me. In fact, there's a line here which will explain to anybody who's ever, how many of you know or love or have visited the Himalayas? Hands up, please. So, there's this line from which I love, because for me, it's the sense of what the mountains mean to me. The book ends like that. It says, Kipling is out of fashion, but there are some lines I've always loved. They go like this. And the last puff of the day brought from the unseen villages the scent of damp wood smoke, hot cakes, dripping undergrowth, and rotting pine cones. That is the true smell of the Himalayas. And once it creeps into the blood of a man, that man will at the last, forgetting all else, return to the hills to die. And I feel like that. I'm not a man, but that woman will when the time comes. I know I'll just crawl back to the hills, and I hope to do that someday, even though I'm in Delhi just now, and I love Delhi too in it.
So before we open it up for questions, I want to take you back to your a personal note about the literary family you come from. You know, all the writers in your family, and there was this fascinating story about the sari that you wore at one of your events and the people who lined up to...
Well, one of the most eminent...
Shivani.
Yes, but one of the most... I come from a family where there are a lot of writers. And once I thought we could even have... We were doing a Dehradun Lit Fest. I said, just call all the cousins and we are in there. But one of my most eminent relatives is sitting here in the front row. His name is Pushpesh Pant. And Professor Pushpesh Pant is just a big clap for Pushpesh. And Pushpesh's family is brilliant, and if I may say eccentric bordering on genius, but I don't know bordering how much, and each of them unique. And Pushpesh's mother was also something of a genius. Pushpesh is no young spring chicken himself, but his mother in those days studied in Shantiniketan, and she studied Mandarin Chinese, so that's another story altogether. And his aunt was the one and only Shivani, one of the most prolific Hindi writers in our part of the world. She wrote over 53 novels and collections of short stories. And her daughter, Mrinal Pandey, a very famous journalist, was having a session like this in Jaipur where we were launching that book. And just for good luck, she gave me one of her mother's old saris. She said, this is for you. So I wore it that day. And then in the end of the session, I told them that I'm so blessed that this sari, the silk sari, this old silk sari, was given to me. It belonged to Shivani. And I came down from the thing, and I was making my way to the book signing, when about 8 women stopped me. They didn't know each other. They were just a group of women. And they said, we want to touch this sari because it belonged to one of the greatest writers we have ever read. So there was that. And there's so many more. My daughter Shivani has written one novel, now writing another. My daughter Meru was the publisher and editor-in-chief in Penguin until now. She's doing something different, very exciting with artificial intelligence. Then my daughter's mother-in-law, who died long ago, had written 2 or 3 novels. So there are a lot of books in that bookshelf, which and that's lovely, because from childhood you think, oh, writing is something which one can do.
On that very lovely note, I'd like to open it up for questions. I'm sure there'll be many. None.
No questions? No, of course there'll be questions. Pushpesh, you can ask me a question. But you'll need a mic. Can we have a mic here in the front row? Right there.
I was just wondering, why did you leave Kukidi behind, your mother? And her
Oh,
connection?
yes.
Yes.
No, my mother, we published a book of my mother's poetry, which she hadn't written the poems, she had remembered them. So he's very fond of my mom, and she used to be a regular at the Lit Fest. But there's not a real question. You're supposed to ask a high literary question.
No, if you want...
This is like family gossip.
No, it's not family gossip. Once you are so rooted in hills, I have a particular fondness for things to leave behind. And I think that's where you...
This is what I forgot to mention. What Pushpesh is talking about is that he rarely translates things. He had once done a Chinese book for me, a thin Chinese book, but he has helped translate 2 of my novels. And Things to Leave Behind, which won the Sahitya Academy Award, he brought out in Hindi and called it Rag Pahari. And in the hills, it's read more, I would say, as in the Hindi version as Rag Pahari. So thank you again,
I
Pushpesh,
think
for
that
that.
novel is absolutely fascinating because it weaves this magic way, merging history, mythology, personal biography, autobiography, legends, lore. I think that makes the hills
These
come
are not
alive.
questions, these are compliments. And in case they cannot be heard, he basically said, you're a genius. But if cousins don't say that, who'll say it? There's a, yeah.
I have a question.
First the question, Mike
Yeah.
is already there.
Yeah, so I have a real question. Paro came out in 1984.
Yes.
I remember when it came out, and I remember the sensation that it caused at that time. And I've always wondered why you didn't bring that character back. You mentioned just now that there was someone like her, but I would have loved to see her as an old woman with a whole book just for her.
Well, one slight problem was that even if you believe in reincarnation, she died in the end. And she died in the end, and the Priya, the narrator, went actually, otherwise I could have said she didn't really die like in Hindi serials, but she went to the cremation ground and a bit of some embers came and burnt her palla and all that. And I tried to come back to that book by writing something called Priya 25 years later, and that was about the narrator Priya. And it was a good book, but it didn't quite work the magic, because without a living Priya, without a living Paro, it just couldn't carry it off. I did my best, but it didn't work. So we'll have to think of some other way.
Maybe a prequel.
Huh?
A prequel.
Prequel, yes. Maybe a prequel. But something, I mean, you got me thinking, because we live in a world of infinite possibilities. Maybe she could just manifest again. Let me try.
I hope so.
Yes. And that is Jeet sitting there, right?
Yes.
So, Jeet, you don't remember, but after Paro came out, I suffered. For 10 years, nobody would publish me. Anything I sent would be rejected because they expected me to write another Paro kind of novel. And I was quite discouraged. And then it was young Jeet Thayal who asked me to write a short story for his collection, and that got me back writing. And that story is in a new collection which is coming out next month. So thank you.
Hi, ma'am. One question. I'm here. Right here.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. This was regarding Jaipur journals. I had a question about the ending. Like, we were all rooting for this main character. I don't want to give any spoilers.
No, you can give spoilers. It came out a long time ago.
No, but still, my friend wants to read it, so I don't want to spoil
Okay.
it for her. So why? Why was the ending the way it was? Like, I just thought that, I want to know your thought process behind that ending.
You mean of that particular character
Yes, yes.
not being able to enjoy the good luck that
Yes.
finally came her way?
Yes, yes.
Because basically she died. You know, I had to, because, you know, she was such a mean and bitter character, and I loved her for the fight in her, the suppressed anger in her. I couldn't see her dealing with success and joy and all. She was not meant for it. She was meant for resistance all the way. Yeah, so that is why I mean, I don't plot out things like that. Something comes to me, and even my editor, who may be sitting here, Manasi, do you remember, if you're sitting somewhere, that Manasi said, don't kill her, don't kill her. But it was inevitable, because some people are just born not to be lucky. Is that it?
I'm glad that you have taken such a good heading. Words are all I have.
Yes.
In my life, 5 words have changed my life. Just 5 words. A great writer, Leo Tolstoy, wrote a book called What Then Must We Do? Small book. After reading that book, I lost my normal sense. What I decided was, I must fight atom bomb in the world. So from Delhi, I walked to Moscow, Paris, London, Washington up to Hiroshima. In Paris, the president put me in prison.
Oh my God.
But nothing happened. From there, put in a train and send me to England. So the whole idea, what I'm saying is, you have taken a very important thing, great message for the future of India.
See,
What can we expect?
See, words are all we have. It's about me. Words are all I have. And I've sacrificed much of my daily life living for words. They matter to me, and they have a different resonance for me. I mean, I'm obsessed by words. And when words are accompanied even by moving images, as in films, they don't have the same feeling for me. I'm not saying other people. And it can be a spoken word. It is the written word. Even when I pray, I'm never sure whether it's the magic of the poetry of those prayers that is getting me, or the feeling behind it. I suspect it's a bit of both. And so words for me are a substitute for life. And that's how we communicate our deepest thoughts to each other. Though increasingly I believe in non-verbal language being even more important. But you've had an exciting life full of ups and downs, and so there clearly words were not all that you had. There was action seems to be in every part of your life, so that also is much more important for those of us who are destined for action, not me. Okay, there's a mic there, please.
Hello. Ma'am, just want to check, to what extent have Indian goddesses and mythology influenced your writing?
It's not only Indian goddesses, but Indian myth, yes. Indian religion, yes. Indian goddesses, very much so. But not only Indian goddesses, but the sacred feminine is a big word, but it's not like that. But the strength of women just reaches out to me. I'm from Kumaon, our goddesses there, the guardian spirits are Nanda and Sunanda, these two sisters. And the sorority between women is also something I respect. And then there are other people like, I wouldn't call her a goddess, but she's a saint. And she's a saint in Spain called Santa Teresa of Avila. And it's too long a story to tell, but Santa Teresa of Avila is in my heart all the time. And the Devis, I have done the goddess trilogy on Sita and Radha and Lakshmi. And perhaps only in India, or in the Indic religion, or whatever, in this imagination, would you have three goddesses who are so different but are emanations of each other. Because Lakshmi is the same, Sita and Radha are supposed to be emanations of Lakshmi. Lakshmi is the goddess of abundance and wealth and fertility. Radha, the forgotten Radha in our decade, is the goddess of sensuality and of beauty and of those joys. And it is such a beautiful and liberating concept to think always of Sri Radha and the joy she brought to the people of Vrindavan. And then you have Sita. And I felt very, very strongly about Sita, and I still do, that any epic text, any foundational text like the Ramayana, if the story it gives is that it's okay for a 9-month pregnant woman to be left alone in a forest, and then to be reclaimed when her sons are grown up into the masculine fold. That story has to be retold. That story has to be reinterpreted. And there are many versions of the Ramayana that don't end like that. So that, I felt there was a collective wounding of Indian women in the portrayal of Sita. Though, of course, there are things that, in Indian myth, everything and its opposite are true. But yes, you're completely right. The Indian goddesses take a very powerful place in my imagination. And especially because the Ugra goddesses, the angry goddesses, are as important as the Shant goddesses. And I love that anger and that strength, that virility almost, I'd say, that the Indian goddesses have. So,
We have time for one more
Hi,
question.
ma'am.
One question.
Yeah, just one. So you have dedicated many decades of your life to literature. So if a woman or a person or a woman were to dedicate, I'm here.
okay.
So if a woman were to dedicate decades of her life to literature, to writing, what she can expect? What are the ups and downs?
She can expect a lot of frustration. Authors never make any money, and authors have you spend a lot of time writing, then you realize, oh, AI could have done it better and quicker. You put so much of yourself into that story that you make yourself vulnerable. If you get a lot of fame, sometimes it rings false, because writers know the real thing from the nonsense. It's a thankless task to be a writer, but at the same time, the secret joys it gives. I wouldn't give up the writing life for anything. You can't. If you're obsessed by words, then you don't give up. Good or bad, you keep at it. And I know that most of the writers sitting in the audience have that same feeling, that they have to do it. It's as I said, it's as important to me as eating and sleeping as to. It's another sense. But it's not fun, this I can say.
Thank you.
Do we have time for one more? Yeah, there's one there. We can do a quick one.
Hi, so I'm a Pahari as well, and I've been out of the Pahars for a long, long time. I don't really remember them. So do you feel like when you've been out too, right, in Delhi? So when you get out of the mountains, do you feel that you still belong to them? Do you feel a sense of belonging still, and do you think you will always feel something?
No. I often feel imposter syndrome because people keep asking me, you write about the Himalayas and all that. And I'm not there that much. I am there. I'm there in my head. I'm there in my knowledge bank. I go there. I do a small literature festival which I mentor there. I'm there in my heart. But I do feel sometimes it's a part of me that is just using the mountains as a convenient label, and I'm putting it into every novel, and I feel uncomfortable with it. But I've tried very hard to live longer spells in the mountains now. But I can't because there are various family and other things that keep me in Delhi. That's why I'm hoping that I go back and spend, but it's not just Kumaon. The place I love very, very much is partly Nepal and most of all Bhutan. I have a long and very complex relationship with Bhutan. And that's where I feel the gods reside just now. That's where when I go there, I just come back feeling blessed and feeling very, as though I've been given a gift. So if that's any answer, I hope it answers your question.